Dzień dobry, witam.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome after the break. It is now my enormous pleasure to interview one of the most distinguished Polish intellectuals, Sovietologist, academic, historian of Poland, and author of my favorite program, that is Historia Żywa, Living History. Andrzej Nowak is my guest. Welcome. That round of applause is fully deserved, Professor. Thank you very much, and I am sorry I can only communicate with you from afar. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful and wonderfully developing conference. I'm in Vienna, at a university that's a year younger than my Krakow University.
Jeżeli oceniamy dzisiejszy stan nauki,
looking at the state of education, the education system in Poland might not be the best. Still, let's take responsibility for building on the wonderful tradition of Polish science, and this is what I want to start with, because my understanding is that this is going to be a discussion. If I understand correctly, this is going to be encouraging for you to have a discussion about how to present Poland and its cultural heritage, its civilizational and political heritage. Do I understand correctly, member? Right, if we have enough time, I will try and summarize the discussion of these 3 days of conference. If time allows, I might ask you to summarize that, but at this point, let's go back to the main theme of this conversation. I'd like to ask you to try and give us a framework for obligatory knowledge about Poland. That would be a framework for other countries, because Poland's image tends to be presented in a distorted way on a regular basis. I heard recently at a conference in Germany from our representative that Poland is a wild animal that should be tamed. So I would like to ask you, Professor, how do you build a set of basic knowledge of Polish advantages? Because Poland has existed very strongly, resiliently in culture, even when it was absent from the map of Europe. How do we prepare such a set to demonstrate to the world that Poland has had its unique contribution to building a set of disciplines that should be promoted? Professor? Thank you very much. I think the first remark that has to be done, and I'm sure has been already quoted at this conference, but it's important in terms of a framework if we're reflecting on what you asked me. The world with which we are tied, for the good and for bad, it's the Western civilization, Christian civilization, European, Western, Christian or post-Christian. This world is in the middle of a civil war, and during a war, arguments are ineffective. War is about winning. That's the most important task, and that's when force is important. And the basis for that force is whether we see ourselves as capable of prevailing, whether we believe that we have the arguments allowing us to win. So my belief is that the most important front of this battle and this civil war By us in this discussion, I mean all Poles. The arguments that we are about to present to defend Poland's image will definitely not effectively reach the other side of this conflict. We should conserve a big part of energy that we have to win the battle at home. And every one of us, whether we want to continue being Polish, what does that challenge require of me today in 2021? That is the most important front of the most important front line. That's more important than what New York Times, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, or CNN will say. From this remark, I may move to presenting a paradox in the form of a situation in which our attempts at presenting Poland in a positive light might be located. The world today is built in a particular way. What is presented in one region and will be seen as positive might be seen negatively in a different region. So the question is whether we can use the same language to talk to a Russian with the propaganda that they've seen for tens and hundreds of years, strengthened by Putin's propaganda in the last 20-30 years. Do we want to have a positive history of Poland handbook referring to Felix Dzierżyński? Is that the kind of handbook that you would like to see? I believe not. I think it's about presenting Poland in a kinder light in this divided world community. If you want to present Poland in an intriguing and kind way, in a positive light in this Western world of transhumanism and progress, then we might use the person, the silhouette of a person that you probably know, and you have a positive image of him. I mean Kazimierz Pułaski, because his monument is halfway between the Congress of the United States and the White House. I think it's one of the most beautiful monuments, sculptures in the U.S. He was the hero of our Confederacy. Why can he be presented positively to such persons as Ms. Cortez? Well, because apparently, based on the proof that we have, he was a transgender person, man, woman, female, man, or this is the communication that we heard recently in the news, and we might reach for that and say, here is our transgender hero of your fight for independence. And that would seem very absurd and a caricature of the way to present Poland in adapting our discourse to the language of the political correctness of Kremlin. And that is what is dominant in Western pro-progressive media. I don't think we want to use that kind of language. I think we want to use the language of what we believe to be true about our identity and our heritage, and that's the most difficult part. It's not easy to do for anyone, because the essence of this story to be told about Poland that we want to present to ourselves and try and present to others would be about funding this on three foundations: Christianity, freedom flowing from Christianity, and that together, combined, Christianity and freedom, create a particular specific culture flowing from Christianity. And I mean the culture developed in Poland in the last 1,000 years, of course, based on the core of Christianity, based on even older antique European culture. How do we tell the modern world that freedom flows from Christianity? How do we try and intrigue them with this story combined with our cultural heritage? Those interested in culture, although they are ever fewer of these, I think, they might find it interesting to look at the table and the numbers, because that's a good way to make things aware to oneself. I mean the table of Nobel Prize winners. Poland is the only country that has perfect gender equity. 4 Nobel Prizes were won by male and 4 by female Poles. Now one might wonder about the choice of these names, about their representativity, because these were awarded to Maria Skłodowska-Curie. The other two were Wisława Szymborska and Olga Tokarczuk. And among men were Sienkiewicz, Raymond Miłosz, and Lech Wałęsa on behalf of Solidarity, Solidarność. This might be an intriguing way to look at Poland from the other side of the fence, of the front line of this civil war. Poland is seen as the one stifling the rights of minorities and groups that are seen as minorities, although they are not a minority. I mean women, of course. A place where particular oppression is applied to women, to ladies, to use the word that raises such hatred among politically correct media. So, in Poland, there are 8 Nobel Prize winners. Well, there's great Russian literature celebrated worldwide, and apparently Poles have the same number of Nobel Prize winners as Russians. And the second shock would be, so Poland is the only country meeting gender parity in this? To understand this phenomenon, it's worth reaching down to the foundation of the Polish character, of the culture of freedom built by this nation. Making a step back, we might go back to the first of the enumerated Nobel Prize winners, I mean Maria Skłodowska. Often she is described as a poor young Pole who had to run away to the West, away from Poland, where women were not tolerated, talented women were not tolerated by men. She had to run away to the West, where she could spread the wings of her talent. It would be worth referring to that stereotype to say the truth, to tell the truth. First, that there was no free Poland. It was a Poland under partitions, and that the price of loss of sovereignty was impossibility to build a scientific infrastructure within which an exceptional talent can develop and grow, because growing such a talent requires investment of time, effort, and money, among others. So Poland is partitioned. It is not free. It is not enslaved by men. It's enslaved by three empires.
I żeby w ogóle zdobyć jakieś wykształcenie w Polsce, poza
And to
województwem
win
lubelskim
any
82%,
education
województwem
under the
województwom
Russian
trzeba mieć
partition, which
zdeterminowaną
covered the
motywację,
2%
albo
of the former Polish territory. Above all, there were no Polish universities and no Russian universities admitted women. And this phenomenon would be worth mentioning in the booklet, you mean. The university, the secret university in the 80s in Warsaw, university or high school for women, the biggest women's higher education institution for women, organized in Warsaw between 1882, since 1882, that taught all kinds of subject matters, lectured by experts in those disciplines. And one of the graduates of that school was Mary Skłodowska. Without that education, she would not have been admitted to the Sorbonne, where she had the opportunity to use the instrumentarium of the scientific capitals of the contemporary world. And she would not be there if it weren't for the university that fought for the freedom of Poland and of women, a university that has no parallel in 19th century Europe. Continuing on this tale of Maria Skłodowska, you might say, okay, she was not employed by the Jagiellonian University, so she had to find her place in Paris. Again, let's contrast that with true facts. Let's take up the discussion with the stereotypical vision of Poland. Well, the Jagiellonian University, like all the universities back then, unlike the first universities in the Nordics or the first universities in the UK, the Jagiellonian University was a freshly renovated provincial university of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, formerly Germanized and only then rebuilt as a Polish university in further stages of its existence, where it was renewed after 1886 as a small, underinvested provincial university under the Habsburg Empire. Although very interested in the success of the young Pole, the Polish Academy of Skills printed her scientific dissertation in 1900 and accepted her as member in 1909. Notice that in France, the same Marie Skłodowska-Curie is not accepted to any scientific institution, to the Académie Française, because the first woman is accepted in the Academy in 1970, 7 years after Skłodowska had been accepted in the Academy of Skills in Krakow. This is not the end of this tale focused on a renowned figure worldwide, because I'm sure she's a renowned Pole, the most recognizable alongside Sister Faustina. Let's add one more ingredient. It's about civic rights being basis of election rights. Marie Curie never was awarded those electoral rights until her death. She could not vote
obywatelskie
because civil rights in terms of electoral rights were only awarded to women 11 years after her death.
cieszyły się pełnymi prawami
And in Poland, full civil rights were enjoyed by women from the very start, from the very reconstruction of independence since November 1918.
Może taką tabelkę też warto
Let's remember about that too. Maybe such a table would be worth presenting to those who point to Poland as the black sheep, who would like to see Poland as in the row of subordinate students. Poland is among the first 10 countries that awarded full civil rights to women. It's 1918. Before it was impossible because Poland was not on the map. France granted these rights to women in 1945. Belgium, 1948. The UK, the motherland of parliamentarism.
Wielkiej Brytanii prawa wyborcze kobiety uzyskały 10 lat po Polkach.
10 years after Poles in 1928. Switzerland, for example, 1971. It's worth putting these dates together to use them as an argument in the dispute about the place of Poland in the map of civilized world. This story was beautifully combined, the story of fight for civil freedom of women with Poland's fight for freedom by Adam Mickiewicz and Collège de France in 1834, when one of the authors talked about the road to emancipation. He said that this road to emancipation, to women's emancipation, was led through the road to Poland's freedom, and it lay in doing what others could not do. It was in the form of participation in a further uprising or conspiratory work, or even fight, weapons in hand, starting from the November uprising. That was the point where he said is the point and the reason why women have to enjoy the same rights as men. And that's why Piłsudski said that the first thing that has to be done was giving women full civil rights, although he knew that that would be detrimental to his political position. Like his advisors said, it was obvious that women would rather vote for national democracy rather than PPS. Piłsudski said, doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, that did not impact the political result of the election, because there was the joint matter of the independence and the emancipation of Polish women. Looking at current Polish female activists who know little about the story of their country, its history and its tradition.
Of course, if we were to follow that path, cultural path, that was created by Poland, founded based on Christian values, we would have to take a step back And here I'm going back to the very first moment from the place I started, so the University of Krakow. So we would have to start with the Constantia Council, when for the first time the Polish legal school was presented. Now we can see the collapse of the Polish legal environments, but then the Polish legal school, the Krakow University, defined a totally different new path for the whole Europe. The Paweł Wlodkowicz lecture, the rector of the Jagiellonian University, a pupil of Stanisław Skarbiniesz. During the meeting in Constantia, he set out a doctrine of nations before Hugo Gosch, before the doctrine of in the 16th century at Salamanca University. It was a mature manifestation of this legal and philosophical doctrine made by the Krakow lawyers. All nations have right to independence and their own land, even the pagan ones. That was a revolutionary idea, and by now it's questioned. We are told that if Poles choose wrong, that means they should be devoid of the right to choose. They should be forced to choose. Otherwise, that's exactly the same idea as was prevailing before the Constantia Council. So some people were told not to have right to decide on their own. Now we have the European Commission and the Court of Justice in Strasbourg. The Pope may say who will be the owner of the land. These are pagans in the light of today's conviction, faith, which is the progress today. So this attitude was questioned in dispute with an authority which was much more serious, because that was the Pope and the Empire in 1417. It's worth recalling then the right of nations to independence and freedom, and even the Emperor and the Pope couldn't neglect that. That's another interesting and important moment which should be stressed in even the shortest history book in Poland. It's worth mentioning that it's a great history of union from 1385 to 1379. It was stopped brutally by external sources, by neighboring empires. The history of union that lasted 410 years, so longer than any European Union, 8 or 9 times longer than the current European Union. Maybe that's a topic for reflection and consideration, and a source of pride. How to maintain a union for so long? How to prevent misunderstanding or dissatisfaction of those who feel underrepresented in the Union. That was something that was solved by Poland and Lithuania for over 400 years. It's also a remarkable history of civic freedom that developed since the 14th century and involves 300 same meetings and many acts being adopted. So local councils meeting, about 67 of them that gathered 4 times a year, and the whole Republic of Poland. These were hundreds of thousands of active citizens in every population, every generation. If you hear anything about young Polish democracy, just mention these 400 local councils and these thousands of citizens. At the times where in no European countries had we anything such long and such durable on such a vast area of land and realized by so many citizens of democratic society. Of course, it's a history that is measured by the most interesting and most important constitutions being adopted, starting from our Charter of Freedoms and Nihil Novi, nothing about us without us. Something that we should postulate now in the European Union. So nothing can be said about Poland if we, the Poles, don't agree for that via our MPs. Of course, that is true for every minority. And last but not least, the last constitution and the whole range of constitutions being adopted by the Polish Sejms considered to be the first modern and written constitution in Europe and the second one after the first constitution adopted by the United States. I mean the Constitution of 3rd of May 1791. Of course, this tradition should be recalled. It's a history of our freedom. I don't know if I have 5 minutes or 2 minutes. Much more, dear professor. Much more, dear professor. I think that we want to listen to you all gathered here. So please continue. So 10 minutes. Okay. This is a round of applause just for you. Thank you very much. I think that it's worth pointing out the combination of this tradition of liberty that I'm describing based on some historical examples from this history of the First Republic of Poland. But the specific aspect of this freedom is that if it's combined with tradition of a nation as a political community, of course the nation is built for many centuries from individual that is aware to create a nation like Mieszko I, then Bolesław Chrobry, then princes who build this community and write the first chronicles until a civic society gathering thousands of representatives of noble and some representatives of farmers as well, but this is a separate topic. So if we combine the history of liberty with the history of political community, there is a problem of threat for this liberty, as I showed based on the example of the Polish legal school from the beginning of 15th century. So the threat is from the side of imperial power. The first person to formulate the essence of Polish political culture was described by the first Polish intellectual, Vincent Kadłubek. In his chronicles, Stories about Polish history, he presented a vision which was anti-imperialist. Of course, he presented great stories of courageous lakids fighting against Julius Caesar, but it's not for us to laugh at it and to mock it. We just need to learn that story. That's exactly opposite to all chronicles from that times, because all other chronicles admire the Alexander the Macedonian, because they admire somebody subordinating weaker nations. And Vincent Kadłubek said that no, the most courageous people are those who oppose to such a power. With all this progress and higher idea, because they, together with all that, they subordinate people that make them slaves and efficient. Fight against is the identity of courageous nation of lakids. And this thought was developed by the Krakow legal school. But this idea is not specified and named in chronicles or political treatises. It was also translated into actions. It was an ongoing fight against domination of empire.
czyli Rzeszy, pierwszej Rzeszy,
The
do panowania nad innymi
First
krajami,
Reich
ingerowania w ich wewnętrzne sprawy.
against their interference in internal
Walki z sąsiednimi
matters of a given country. This is a fight with neighboring empires, like Muslim empires, that brought its vision of emancipation, of independence in the name of Allah, and was stopped. That was one of the most important anniversaries that we should celebrate. Because the Poland, Lithuania, and the Cossacks stopped the Ottoman Empire. And another important date that we should remember. It's not celebrated in Vienna, at least. So we should recall it, and we should remind of it as an emanation of our fight at the threshold of Christianity. But first and foremost, this is a story of anti-imperialistic fight. We do not want any empire, no matter whether it is a Muslim one or a communist one, to impose their will on us. And we're ready to stop this empire. And the Poles, the courageous Poles, managed to do so on many occasions. Let me just remind you once again about these events. 1920, the Battle of Warsaw. But let's take another look at it. Poland, with its consistent fight for its right to independence, it led to the collapse of 3 empires in Central and Eastern Europe that were governing this territory in the 19th and 19th century, the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, and other. These empires collapsed not only because 2 million American soldiers started to fight on the front during the First World War, but also as they undermined the structure of Habsburgs and Romanovs empires. These were national matters, and the best emanation of this right to liberty from external power, which didn't bring all good and very often brought subordination and was very paternalistic. So taking the reins and devoiding other of possibility to decide for themselves. Poland in the 19th century built its culture of rebellion in the name of independence, and that led to the collapse of empires. Some people would like Poland to be an empire, but the empire has its cost, the cost of becoming slaves. And that's why Poland perceives these empires from this side, and Poland caused that this empire failed in the 1917 and with this fight for independence. And Poland won battles with empires, because the fight that we're going to talk during the discussion of great historians and political journalists about the Second World War, who will tackle the issue whether the Second World War could be avoided, this fight was not lost. We were not defeated. We cannot complain that we were defeated. Poland won the Second World War because, of course, Germans are still stronger than us. Russia of Vladimir Putin bothers us, but we're at home. We defended our independence, and we have to continue to defend it. It was not only about September campaign and didn't end up in 1945. We didn't have the victory parade. But in 1985, we could feel the satisfaction and we could be even more satisfied. However, we were imposed some views. We had to thank to the communist masters for this independence. And that was the falsification of the logics of Polish independence, because the Polish independence won not the round table. And that's something really optimistic. And this optimistic note should be stressed, this optimistic part of the Polish anti-imperialistic fight. We win with empires, and we can win another empire willing to take over our independence. And there are some environments who also feel subordinate to this empire, which doesn't respect the Christian values, which limits our choice, and which destroys our culture in the name of cancel culture, and that destroy the whole European heritage that is embedded also in the Polish history and culture. If one song could express the essence of Polish history, I would ask you to play on YouTube the Revolutionary Etude by Frédéric Chopin. That is an expression of anti-imperialistic rebellion, the mutiny, which is not made on behalf of as an individual process of sexual minorities or transsexuals. It's a revolution in the name of the right to liberty of a nation. It has transformed into strength of sounds by Frédéric Chopin, who is another symbol of Polish nation, together with Marie Curie-Skłodowska. If we were to use the same medium, so music, let me refer you to the classical music masterpiece, the greatest one in the 21st century. That was the symphony of painful songs, and Michael Dvoretsky symphony that with this premiere in 1977, which was very successful, became really successful in 21st century, becoming one of the most known masterpiece after Chopin's masterpieces associated with Poland. So please get acquainted with chapter 2 of this work of art, because the public all around the world is listening to 2 sentences from Gestapo prison and palace in Zakopane in September 1944 by Helena Błażusiakówna, a young patriot who was imprisoned there and beaten and tortured. And she expressed how human dignity encounters slavery. And these words are very important, and they're part of this song. Mom, please stop crying. Mary the Saint, my Queen, support me, Holy Mary. That's all. That's the message of the symphony, of the music, of this masterpiece, and of the whole Polish history. The message that names such people as Sister Faustina, Helena Kowalska, Sister Faustyna, the most known Polish woman, apart from Marie Skłodowska-Curie and the Christ, the most popular image of the merciful Jesus Christ, And it's easy to associate this story with the story of Sister Faustina and people surrounding her, living the same times and the same place. Maximilian Kolbe staying for some time in Krakow, then in Kokalanów, a great hero. And John Paul II, the one whom we ask for support anytime during the 20th and 21st century. So hopefully, I think I just exhausted my time. Thank you very much for your time. I could continue, of course, but thank you. I will stop at this point. Thank you. Dear Professor, no one got such a round of applause. Well deserved. I think you have left us. No, I'm there. Okay, that's great to have you. So we can sum up it. We have 5 minutes left. So that when in the US, in the Western world, there is a fight for women's rights and many new forms of feminism. We might say that Poland has already won this fight. If we have some crisis of freedom, of parliamentary democracy, and we are set as an example of anti-freedom, we can say we have won the fight already. And I don't know if you agree with us that what we need now is the courage to keep our heads high and to speak proudly of Poland and its heritage. Of course, we can continue the story and to translate it into many symbols speaking for themselves. There is another important thing, the accusation of the crime of colonialism, which is a false claim against Poland. Poland might state that Poland was decent, as one of my masters said. So non-rogue Poland that was not involved in colonization of the world outside Europe, but it got colonized like Hungary did by some external forces. We were under the Russian and German Empire. Apart from, in case of Hungary, it was also a Muslim empire. And they say that we should pay for the crime of colonialism, so it's worth mentioning one important name, Joseph Konrad Theodor Korzeniowski. It's yet another person which is well known globally that came from the Polish culture of honor and freedom. Honor, the old-fashioned world, it should be merged with other concepts. So this honor became a tool of ruthless analysis of this Western culture of exploitation and sad and pessimistic diagnosis of the crisis of the Western world that continues until now, that we're observing now. So what Joseph Conrad wrote and described in his famous book, it continues by now. Thank you very much, Professor.
Dziękujemy bardzo, proszę Państwa. Teraz dosłownie 3-4.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. 3-4 minutes break, and then we move to the next panel. Also, extremely interesting about current issues connected with the Polish history. Thank you.